On December 7th, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor ended American World War II neutrality. Within the American Jewish community, there was an even stronger desire to fight in Europe as Nazi policies toward Jews continued to worsen. Approximately 550,000 American Jews served in World War II.
Morris Gordon was a rabbi. He was born in Poland, in Russian-occupied Poland, came to the U.S., initially enlisted in the army before taking a commission as a Jewish chaplain. He was, for a time, the only chaplain along the Burma Road. He served in the China-Burma-India Theater. The story behind the arc is Chaplain Gordon was traveling in a Jeep that's hit by a bomb. It instantly kills the driver of the Jeep, and it throws Chaplain Gordon into a river alongside the road that they're traveling on. Fortunately for Rabbi Gordon, there's a Chinese officer close enough to see what had happened. He rushes over. He pulls Rabbi Gordon out of the river, saves his life. Chaplain Gordon survives. Unfortunately, everything he uses for Jewish services in the field is destroyed. But while Chaplain Gordon is recovering from his wounds, he develops a relationship with this Chinese officer who had saved his life. And this Chinese officer ends up building him this ark out of teak wood, and Rabbi Gordon is able to use it to carry a Torah, conduct Jewish services in the China-Burma-India Theater for the rest of the war, and it becomes a prized possession in his home for the rest of his life until he passed away in 2005. Louis Ligdortz was flying over Germany on April 22nd, 1944. He was shot down. He ends up imprisoned at Stalag Luft 3. In this POW camp, he begins to keep a diary. This diary shows the German rations, the amount of food they got for a week, which had them above a starvation diet, but not much. You see, 3 ounces of meat is on the list. That's for a week. In World War II, if you had a religious identifier on your dog tag, it would have been H, a P, or a C. You were Hebrew, Protestant, or Catholic. Those were the 3 religions that were known to the military at the time. For those going to Europe and knowing what Nazi policies were towards Jews, whether you wanted that H on your dog tag was something that you would have to think about. One of the most frequent questions we get is what happened to these Jewish American soldiers that were prisoners of the Nazis? Were they made victims of the Holocaust? And most typically, they were not. The Jewish soldiers were often treated the same as other American soldiers. The most notable exception to that was a camp called Berga, where 350 American soldiers were sent, and about 20% of them were Jewish, so way higher than you would have gotten from any kind of random sampling. And those 350 Americans were made slave laborers right alongside European civilians. At the end of the war, the Germans took them on a death march, and a huge number of them were killed. And that's the one true Holocaust story as it applies to a group of Americans.
This camera here sort of gives us a lens into another aspect of Jews in the military. In particular, what we're looking at is a camera that was owned by Sergeant Karl Heinemann, a German immigrant who was able to escape Germany in 1938, along with many other German Jews who came to the United States before the war began. And because of the nature of the freedom that they were able to have here in the United States that they would have lost in Germany, elected to enlist in the United States military and give back to this country. Many of these other German Jews wound up at Camp Ritchie, became part of a famous group known as the Ritchie Boys because of their linguistic abilities. They became interpreters, they became intelligence officers, some of them behind the lines as spies, all of them in the desire to do in the Nazi Empire and give back to the United States for what they felt they had earned and deserved.
As Americans reached further into Europe, they discovered the horrors of Nazi concentration camps. There had been rumors of Nazi atrocities. American Jewish GIs played an important role. They reported to the world what they saw. They were often Yiddish speakers, the only ones who could communicate with survivors.
Everybody was clad in these pajamas with black and gray stripes. So they were frightened, and I said, "Hat mich kein Angst." This is Yiddish Hund. And they still were afraid. And then Chaplain Bonin said, "Ich bin..." This always gets me. "Ich bin an Amerikaner Rabbiner." I am an American rabbi. And it's as if all of the emotions had been unleashed.
There are 3 Jewish Medal of Honor recipients from the Second World War: Raymond Zusman, Isidor Jackman, and Ben L. Solomon.
Ben was a dentist. He was a graduate of the University of Southern California Dental School, who enlisted in the Army, received an infantry training, but when the Army found out that he was a dentist, they pulled him out of the infantry, gave him the commission, and sent him into the Pacific, where he wound up in Saipan at the beginning of the largest land battle in the Pacific. He was in charge of a aid station right in the front lines, basically. He was made battalion medical officer, but he stayed where he was, and the Japanese then overran the American lines. They broke into his aid station there and began bayoneting and shooting the wounded soldiers in there. He himself then grabbed a rifle and started to defend them to the best that he could. He ran out front of the tent and found a machine gun emplacement where the Americans manning that had been killed. He took over the machine gun. When the Americans came back the following day, after they were able to push the Japanese back, they found him dead, slumped over the machine gun, and approximately 90 Japanese bodies sort of piled up in front of it. And he was immediately put in for the Medal of Honor, but it was turned down because Benjamin Solomon was a medical officer, and according to the Geneva Conventions, medical officers are not supposed to be involved in offensive operations. The argument, however, was made that he was not involved in offensive operations, but he was involved in defensive operations.